Sherwood. Welcome to meeting number 2 for our Community Advisory Committee for the Sherwood West Relook project. Since we're not meeting in person quite yet, and since we don't have that familiarity with each other, I can't get that word out of my mouth tonight. I'm just going to scroll down the list and let's just take a moment to introduce ourselves. So I'm going to start. There's a person named Connie. Is that Conrad?
Connie. Conrad Sproul. I go by Connie.
Great. And then Councillor Rosner.
Oh, hi, everybody. I'm Council President Rosner, and I think I'm one of 2 councillors on the committee.
That is correct. Jean Simpson.
Hi, Jean Simpson. I'm Chair of the Planning Commission.
Brian Dorsey.
Hello, I am Brian Dorsey, and I'm the Chairman of the Sherwood Police Advisory Board.
Brian Fairbanks.
Good evening. My name is Brian Fairbanks. I am the Sherwood Chamber of Commerce President and local business owner, and local business owner.
Dave Grant.
Hi, I'm Dave Grant, former member of council.
John Clifford.
I am John Clifford, and I'm part of the Sherwood Parks and Recreation Board member.
Emily Campbell.
Hi there, I'm Emily Campbell. I'm a community member, 20-year resident here in Sherwood.
Tamara.
Hi, I'm Tamara First, and I am a community resident. I've lived here for 11 years.
And Rodney.
Hey, Rodney, part of the Parks and Rec Board.
Are you okay?
How about Kennedy?
Hey, I'm Kennedy Hawkins. I'm a community member, lived in Sherwood for 25 years, and my house is at the end of Haiti Road. So go to the high, if you ever want to find me, go to the high school all the way at the bottom. That's my house. Visitors welcome.
Great. And I think we just introduced all the CAC members. I'm going to switch over now to a couple of staff members and project team leaders. So with that, Bob Galati.
Hi, Bob Galati, city engineer.
Joy Chang.
Joy Chang, senior planner.
Want something to drink?
Yeah.
Chris Zahas.
Hi, I'm Chris Zahas with Leland Consulting Group. We're part of the consulting team leading the economic and market analysis.
And Sam.
Pepsi.
Okay, why don't you say Pepsi instead of...
How about Joe?
Hi, everybody. Joe Dills with Angela Planning Group. I'm the project manager for the consultants and also the facilitator for the committee. So great to see everybody again.
And Kira?
Hi, I'm Kira, and I work with Joe at Angela Planning Group.
Great. Oh, there's Sam. Sam, do you just want to introduce yourself really quick?
Yeah, sorry about that. I had to jump out. I'm Sam Brookham with Leland Consulting Group.
Great. I feel like we all know each other a little bit more now.
Yeah.
So with that, I'm going to pass this off to Joe.
Okay, thank you. Quick little business item. We had a meeting summary from last meeting, from the first meeting in the packet. Just wanted to check in to see if anybody had any comments or changes to the meeting summary.
I was just going to ask a question. In item number 1, we have a 20-minute walkable, but I think the Parks Board writes it as a 10-minute walkable neighborhoods.
Thank you. We'll tune up the summary there to say 10-minute. Anybody else have any changes or? Okay. So I'm going to take that as consensus support for the minutes as written. We'll move ahead with those in the record. And let's go to the next slide if we could, Kira, just a quick check-in on where we are in the process. This is our timeline with time going from left to right. You may recall we described a 7-meeting sequence for the CAC. So we are at this red circle for meeting number 2. This meeting builds on the last one where we talked about existing conditions and trends that are important to consider for the plan. And we're going to augment that with a discussion of vision and then also the economic opportunities materials that you saw in the packet. And then what that does is it gives us a good foundation of information to start talking about updates, including things we might keep as the same in the plan in meeting number 3. So that's a little foreshadowing of where we're going for next meeting. For community involvement, we have an open house that will occur after meeting 3. And so we'll tell you a little bit more about that later, but that's basically where we are in the process and where we're headed immediately. Okay. So let's go ahead and go to our first agenda item, which is our public engagement plan. And Kira is going to walk us through that, and then we can open it up to your ideas and comments on the public engagement plan.
Thanks, Joe. So the purpose of this document is to guide our public engagement process and to make sure that it is really inclusive and transparent, and so that ultimately we get a plan that reflects the voices of your community. And throughout this process, we want to be really intentional about hearing from community members who will be directly impacted by this project, like people who own property or businesses in the area, but also from community members who have historically been left out of these types of plans. So we'll be doing some targeted outreach to those types of groups. We'll also be making sure that we engage key stakeholders and community groups such as the Chamber of Commerce and the Sherwood Senior Center and probably others. This document also helps us clarify our key messages, and those are the what, where, why, when, who, and how of this plan. And those will help us so that we are being consistent when we're talking to the public about this process and help us get a consistent messaging. And one of those key messages that I'll just note today, which is particularly pertinent to today's discussion, is to create a better jobs housing balance in Sherwood, and especially in the context of the other expansion areas on the west side of metro area. And these are just some of the tools that we're planning on using, both to provide project information, but also to gather feedback from community members. As you can see in the box to the right here, we've already started doing some of these, including some stakeholder interviews, which you will hear a little bit more about from Sam later. We've done a mailing to property owners, and of course, these committee meetings like the one we're having today, which are live streamed on YouTube and available for the public to view. And they're also invited to provide public comment. And although our outreach to date has been pretty focused on property owners and key stakeholders, as I've mentioned, as the project progresses, we will really be expanding our outreach to get to other groups. And those can include homeowners associations that are in the surrounding areas, local advocacy or community-based organizations, and of course, just the community at large. We want to really make sure everyone knows what's going on and everyone's able to learn about the project and give us some input. And as Joe mentioned earlier, we are also going to be holding a few community-wide events and or surveys, and these might end up being in person or online, and that just depends on what the local COVID-19 restrictions are like later this year. But the first one of those would be in the early fall. I'm going to pause here, and I actually have a few questions for you, and I'm going to jump to the next slide real quick, but then we can go back and look at this list. So my questions for you are these the right tools and outreach methods? And then also, who else should we be talking to during the process? Because you guys are really, you really know your community. And so we would love to get your input on what methods are best for reaching people in Sherwood. Is there a newspaper that everybody reads, or a radio station, maybe Brian's radio station that everybody listens to? And how can we really reach people? But I'm going to leave it up on this slide so you can kind of analyze this list. And feel free to raise your hand or just shout out any responses that you have.
And I'll throw out one more prompt question. What has worked really well in the past for public outreach?
Fortunately or unfortunately, the community Facebook pages are pretty active here.
Okay.
Agreed.
I would also say you mentioned papers. So we have the Sherwood Gazette for the hard copy newspaper.
Okay.
And I don't know what it's going to look like, but the Chamber of Commerce is just opening up in-person networking again.
Yeah, yes.
And they often used to have pretty good turnout at their monthly breakfasts, and people were usually somewhat willing to get involved with things.
Yeah, so that's speaking on behalf of the chamber, and just correct on that. And I would welcome working towards setting something up like that as well, community-wide, when needed throughout this process. And that's a good opportunity.
Great.
Brian, is there a particular part of the membership that is kind of the manufacturing, industrial, larger employers end of the spectrum, a way to reach those folks? That question came up in an earlier meeting.
We can. The answer is yes. And I can get information and gather it from the chamber itself, the executive, and then communicate that to this group.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
If it makes sense, there's also the Sherwood Saturday Market for like a pop-up event tabling. And I know the Robin Hood Festival is doing their thing in, I think, September now. And I'm not sure if Cruisin' moved theirs, but there's a variety of, it's that time of year.
And Cruisin' too, and an information booth at Cruisin' would be fantastic as well. And
Great.
That's something that I can work with too. I'm on the Cruisin' core committee, so just that's another thought. So.
Okay. Other thoughts on outreach? Go ahead, Jean.
In addition to the interested parties email list, the email list for the other volunteer boards and commissions that the city has.
Yeah.
Maybe something through the senior center.
Mm.
Yep. Yeah, the Y is also a close neighbor, so they come to mind as well.
Yeah.
Music on the Green's going to be happening a few times, right?
What was that?
Was that Tamara?
Yeah, Music on the Green is going to happen, right? We have a couple of those coming up.
Yep.
Yes.
Their option.
Are we talking about opportunities to get information out to people at these various events we've been mentioning, or are we trying to gather feedback, or both?
Well, I think both, but really trying to advertise the public events so that we can get feedback. If we're hosting an online event or an in-person event, it helps us to have these contacts so that we can get the word out so that people know it's happening and can join in and attend.
I know that if we're throwing senior center out there, then we should go the other direction for age. And I know that all of the schools have constant communication with their parents. Sometimes that's the only thing the parents read. You could get, maybe you don't want all of their feedback all the time because there's a lot of moms out there that have a lot to say, but good resource.
Yeah, and this is Tim. I would totally agree with that. The more we can push to people the information and collect from them as opposed to expecting them to show up to an event, the better off we're going to be. And it's always a challenge getting people to come to a an event, they're just busy. You know, it's not because they're not interested. And typically at those events that we've done in the past for things like this, you really only, the vast majority of the folks in the room are people that have economic interest in what's happening in the potential annexation of those lands. The other thing I would mention is back to the school, and maybe Erica, this is something you could work with Kristen on. They have an extensive key communicator list that they email announcements out to that they might be willing to put an announcement out there for us as well.
Yes, I will work with Kristen. We've used that before, I believe.
And a process question is there going to be a chance for this committee to review the survey questions? You mentioned a survey.
It's further down the line. It would probably be along the timing of the online open house open house is usually kind of coordinated. So in the fall, but we'll definitely be looking for your feedback on what types of questions we're asking people.
Great.
Yeah, and if we don't have a meeting in the lead up to that open house, we could just do it over the wires and get feedback that way. Okay. Any last comments? These are great suggestions on outreach. Connie, is there something you wanted to mention?
No, I'm just taking it all in right now.
Okay.
I don't have anything to add. It looks quite extensive to me, and unfortunately, I don't have anything to add to it.
Okay. All right. Okay. Then it'll be a living document for sure on our outreach, so we can always add later. Let's move from that agenda item to our first one, which is a brainstorming and feedback exercise of sorts. As you saw in the packet materials, and maybe participated in originally, the preliminary concept plan had a vision statement, a set of goals, and a set of evaluation criteria. The goals and criteria used principally in evaluating alternatives. We intend to do the same thing. And so really what we're about in this discussion is getting your contributions to how we might update those materials. So let's go to the next slide. Here's a summary of the memo that was in your packet. I won't read all of the components from the vision statement, but as you see there, it emphasizes neighborhoods and well-designed housing, great place for families, complete community, and well-administered and contributes to the fiscal health of the city. So those are familiar themes. I think we have a couple of new things that have come up in the intent for this plan. And the goals also are on the table for updates. So here's how we would like to go about this. We have a prompt question, a little story question that I'd like to pose to you. And then what we can do is go round robin amongst the committee and get your feedback. And we will then take that feedback and see how the themes kind of weave into an update of the words that are on the screen. So let's go to the next slide. Wait for it to advance. There we go. Okay, so as I mentioned, it's a little bit of a story. Imagine that you have to leave Sherwood to go away, to go live on a South Sea island. You return in 20 years, and the Sherwood West concept plan has been successfully implemented. It's built, it's lively, it's working. You really like what you see. Take a moment and try and visualize, what is it that you see? So a minute or two to think, and then I'll go down the list and we'll get some feedback from everybody.
Norman, is that you on the line? On the phone
Hello?
line? Hi, is that
No.
Norman?
It is.
Okay,
I finally made it.
great. Glad to have you.
I was trying to reach you on my landline. My landline doesn't make calls like this. So I finally got out the car, got the cell phone that the kid gave us in case of an emergency. And then I had to figure out how to work it. So, but I'm here.
Welcome, Norman. Glad you're here.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm going to go from my list here because it doesn't have all the staff mixed into it, and it'll be a little easier. And I'm just randomly going to pick Brian as the first one. Sorry about that, Brian. But usually people answer this really kind of as if just a phrase. I see, here's what I see, or I see X. So Brian, when you come back, you like it? What are you seeing?
Which Brian?
Yeah, which sorry, Brian Fairbanks. That's right, we have two.
Great. So I see four things immediately, and I see it kind of like from south to north. And right, the very first thing is I want access from the north and from the east that is. And it's going to impact 99. It's going to impact all this stuff, but I want that well planned and well thought out flow. I like to see some great housing. You guys talk about Chicken Creek and how that's a deterrent. I think that there's some great hillside opportunities up there for some neat and unique housing as it gets higher. And I'd like to see the north part develop light industrial commercial.
Okay. All right, great.
All right.
Dave Grant, what do you see?
Well, first of all, is my audio coming through all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. You know, I think that I think that just I would expect to see more of what we've got. You know, if I look, I'm sorry, how many years did you say we've been gone on the island?
Yeah, 20 years out.
Okay, so if you look back 20 years, you know, Sherwood wasn't all that much different. It was just smaller. We didn't have a lot of things we have today, but it was a great place to live, and it's still a great place to live. And I would just expect managed growth to create a bigger experience, physically larger experience, but similar to what we have now. And I think it's going to be great.
Good, thank you. Okay, John Clifford.
Yeah, here I am. So my two ideas would be less or no parked cars on residential streets. Hopefully, you know, we can utilize some other form of parking so we have more access through residential streets. Another thing would be more bike lanes or pedestrian paths with limited stopping or interruptions, so they're more freer and flowing.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
That's fine. Okay.
All right. Let's go over to Emily Campbell.
Sure. I would love to see a mix of housing with community areas, natural areas. I'd love to see people out walking and using all of those spaces all together, as we do see in a lot of areas here in Sherwood already. I'd love to see smooth transitions between the residential and any supporting commercial areas in that immediate area, so that everything just kind of flows. Same with that north to south transition, you know. And what Brian said about the development areas, the larger employment areas being, you know, easily accessible, but with minimal impact to the residential areas.
Okay, awesome. All right, Tamara.
Okay, well, first of all, gone 20
You might have to get a little close to your mic.
Okay, can you hear me better now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, number one, an airport to take me back to the island. Okay, but seriously, it would be neat if there was a larger park space. I mean, Snyder has a decent sized park. but with the rolling hills isn't necessarily usable for all activities. It'd be nice if we could have some larger like movie venues and whatnot outdoors. Stella also right behind me, you know, is limited because we've got that wetland that runs through it. It'd be neat if we had a larger park area, maybe with water. So is that along Chicken Creek or something like that would be really nice. I know many of us were talking about how much we appreciated the opportunity to go paddleboarding this summer. I don't think we have a water space that's large enough or clean enough that we could utilize that, but something along that line to draw people out would be really cool. I agree with the idea of north area being light industrial commercial. I'd like to see houses with some work-live spaces. And single cottages for our aging population that are single level so that they can continue maybe to live in Sherwood and have, you know, maybe smaller platform for their I can't talk today. Wider streets. So I agree with the cars being an issue. However, as the parent of 3 children who all have become teenagers and now are 20 somethings that are still living at home and are driving, we have small driveways that don't even accommodate for today's larger size cars. And it would be nice if we had wider streets because inevitably there will be on-street parking for larger homes that have more people living in them.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Let's go to Rodney Lister.
I got a couple. I'd like to come back to an oasis in a big metro area. So somehow keep Sherwood an oasis as the metro grows around us. A large staple headquarters of something in the north that brings jobs and brings an identity to Sherwood. So Microsoft or something along those lines kind of thing. A go-to destination for wine country in the south. So something eclectic, something that down south. Great schools and lots of families, because that's what brought us to Sherwood to start with. And then a go-to sports or park that gives Sherwood an identity of something that we're known for, where people will come from other cities to come to Sherwood, like a mountain bike park or a great track or something where people will come to Sherwood for.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you. Kennedy, you're up next.
So I see 5 things: family-centric, open spaces, walkable, no urban sprawl, gateway to Oregon's wine country.
All right. Kira, you are great at getting all those notes. Perfect. Angie, let's go to you.
The first things that came to my mind are neighborhoods that have the tree-lined streets. That's something we always hear community members talking about, along with trails or pathways that connect different neighborhoods and different parks to each other, as has been talked about often as well. And somehow to try to keep the divide from happening, you know, especially with the highway down the middle. Once we add in Sherwood West, it's just going to be even more on that side. And I envision somebody coming up with a solution to keep it as connected as possible.
Okay, great ideas. Norman?
Yes, I have a question. I'm kind of a black sheep, I guess, because I'm neither in the county nor in the urban growth. I'm on Elwert Road, and everybody across the road from me is in the city, and those of us that are on the west side here are out.
Right.
A lot of the things that are being talked about and discussed, you know, are good, but I've tried to have difficulty imagining how they would fit our particular situation. The light down on Edie was a big deal because that really helped the traffic, and the one up by the high school even helped even more. But it's still a traffic problem to get in and out of our drives at everybody's satisfaction. Because if I'm making a right-hand turn into a 90-degree angle, people behind me start to honk, or I'm coming from Newburgh down and making a left-hand turn into my driveway, that I really cause some problems. And I'm just kind of concerned about how you would control something like that.
Okay. good feedback, and we'll talk a lot about traffic as we move ahead. And just to provide a little bit of information back, over time, the city will grow to the west side of Elwood.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah.
We
with
moved out
the-
here in '82.
Right.
You'd imagine this change we've seen. When we first built out here where we are, the only light we could see from our living room was QT. And it's no longer even there. So you can see how the changes really affected us.
Yeah, yeah, okay. But we'll capture that thought about traffic being managed and being improved.
Yeah. Well, one other question. A surveyor came by here the other day and they were driving stakes. It looks like they're going to take another 15 feet from the front, and he thought it was going to be for a passing lane between Edie and the top of the hill. Do you know what that is going to actually be?
I don't, and we may have to have staff get back to you.
Yeah. See, that's our problem. I mean, we're in the county, but we're not in the city. We're not in urban growth boundary. We're still outside. We were supposed to be phase one and all drawn in at the same time. When the high school was pulled in, they left us out. So we fit no category, actually.
Erica, can we do a follow-up on that?
Yes.
Sure,
So
love
Norman, I will follow up on your question about the surveyors tomorrow.
Is this Erica?
Yes. I will follow up with
Thank
you about, yes.
Yeah. Thank you for your patience with me.
Okay. No problem. Those are good
All right.
questions, Norman.
I'm through. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Let's go. We have just a few folks left. Thanks for your patience. Let's go to Jean.
So I come back, I envision something similar to what we have now in our residential areas, small neighborhood nodes that are connected by trails and green spaces while protecting our creek corridors. We have a thriving commercial area filled with local vibrant shops. And we have vital employment opportunities that are well-designed and consist of low impact development.
Okay.
Could you repeat just that last part for me real
Yes,
quick?
starting with
vibrant.
Yeah.
Okay. A vital employment opportunities in well-designed, low-impact developments.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, Connie, you come back and you like what you see. What do you see in Sherwood West?
Well, I like what I see and hear in total. I think the big challenge is going to be keeping the north end of this project and the west of Elwood somewhat connected to the south end. Major problem. We need a mixed housing. We need local commerce in the north area, and so all those things, as well as parks and the development of recreational opportunities in Chicken Creek, tying in with Cedar Creek and on over to the Tualatin watershed.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Tim, you're up next.
Great, thanks. So all the suggestions so far and the tone and everything is great. You guys covered a lot of things that I always think about. But if maybe reinforce a few things and a few additional things. I think having a plan that's very sensitive to keeping East and West Sherwood connected across 99 West is going to be important. It's going to be a constant battle with the state and Metro as we move forward. I'd really like to see a plan that in partnership with Washington County that relocates traffic flowing through our community south of Elwood and south of the city and relieve some of the stress on that road, because I only see that increasing over time as people in the Yamhill County are trying to get to the employment centers over in Hillsborough. And we've had some preliminary conversations with the county about that already. You know, when I'm thinking 20 years out, I think the comments about the trails within the different communities and having the trails connect to different parts of the cities is absolutely critical. I mean, my vision is that a 12-year-old can get on their bicycle out at the corner of Elwert and LeBeau and ride it all the way to Rainbow Market to get their candy and all the way home, and a parent feels that that's safe. You know, they're not crossing major roads and they have a path to get there. So I think that's absolutely critical as we move forward. On the kind of more technical side, one of the reasons I'm really excited about developing more employment land out there is it brings balance to our tax base. It's costs us more money to service residential areas than it does to, as a city, to service commercial, industrial, and et cetera lands, and by a good margin. So it really helps the city. For every dollar we bring in on residential and property taxes, it costs us about $1.25 to service that. So bringing a little bit more balance to jobs versus residential, I think, is critical for the health of the city moving forward. So I think, I mean, again, everyone has some great suggestions, and they're very much aligned with how I think about things, and forward to see how this develops.
Super. Okay. So Brian Dorsey, you get the award for hanging in there. You're our last one, unless I miss somebody. So what do you see when you come back?
Well, I mean, again, as everyone has said, a big thing for me is family centric, right? So when I think of that, something that drew us here is when we first drove down, we first bought on Greengate, the streets were wide enough for kids to play, and there were tons of kids out. It was summertime, and they were just having a ball, and that really melts me a sense of family, a sense of community. Utilizing our protected green space for public space and walkways, I think, would be critical. I think for those citizens that live on that side, they don't want to feel like a stepchild of the Sherwood community, right? Or an afterthought of the Sherwood community. It should be well connected and mirror some of the great things that we enjoy already. I live off Sunset. The white picket fence, it's a picturesque street, and people come from all over in the fall to take pictures on Sunset. And if we could imagine something like that on the west side, I think that would really help people to feel connected to what we have in the Woodhaven area and throughout Sherwood. Heights of buildings, I can't imagine 4-story buildings hitting you in the face as you cross 99. So I would say there definitely be some consistency in terms of the overall building codes and keep them consistent to what we have existing.
Okay. All right. So did I miss anybody?
Yeah.
Doug? Yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
please.
this is Doug. Yeah, you missed me, so that's okay. Well, I mean, really hard not to be repetitive. There's been so many good things said. Just to touch on a few things or echo a few things. I think, you know, a large office complex, you know, major headquarters or something like that on the north end would be great, or you know, an industrial base for, you know, light industrial base, clean manufacturing. I think a large format park, you know, with some, you know, maybe some fields or some other functions that we can't support in our existing parks, as was said before, but really a hub park on that side, maybe incorporating some, you know, creek frontage if possible. Certainly protecting all of those wetlands and creeks and using that as a natural, like, conduit for the trails to continue, much like as, you know, throughout Woodhaven, along the wetlands in Woodhaven and the creeks in Woodhaven. Very similar concept over there. You know, residential, you know, primarily single family residential, is I think that's what people are drawn here for, but also mixing in more diverse housing types. I think, you know, some smaller scale multifamily, you know, much more so than we have now. You know, some of the newer formats like the cottage clusters and some other, you know, really high quality, you know, diverse housing types and price points and sizes, you know, to handle a wider range of needs, I think is important, but really keeping it neighborhood scale. And someone mentioned, several people have mentioned family. I mean, whenever I talk to anyone about Sherwood, like, it being a family centric town is always one of the first things, if not the first thing everyone talks about. So I think continuing that, you know, family feel it's a family town, and it will continue to be in 20 years. And then the connectiveness across 99, right? So we'll have, in 20 years when I come back, we will have, multiple, above grade or below grade crossings for pedestrians and bikes, for sure. At least 2, maybe 3. Ideally, maybe there's even 1 or 2, over grade or below grade car crossings, so that the connectiveness of the community is much greater than it currently is.
Okay. Emily, I see your hand up. Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly add on to the connectivity thing that I've lived on both sides of the highway. We spent our first 16 years on the west side, and then a few years ago moved over to the east side. And we had to go out of our way to plan to go into Sherwood on a safe route with our young children. And after moving to the east side of town, we had no idea how disconnected we really were from town. And we have spent so much more time in the downtown area at the events and all of the Saturday market and all of that stuff. In the 2 years that we've been here, we spend more time down there now than we ever did in the first 16 years of living here. So I just wanted to 4th, 5th, and 6th, my support on that connectivity stuff.
Okay, fantastic. Want to make sure I didn't miss anybody else. All right, great. Well, good feedback. We now have the challenge of working through this and kind of picking out the themes. Yeah, Tim.
Yeah, I just wanted to add real quick. I'm hoping one of the things that comes out of this process is we equip ourselves with tools to help manage the growth as well. Specifically, I think about things like annexation agreements, et cetera, because Oregon makes it really difficult to partner with our schools to manage growth, so we're not overwhelming the school system.
Mm-hmm.
We want to make sure that we're creating the tools for future councils, future planning commissions, to be able to help manage that process as we move forward, because we have great schools, and I don't want to ruin that moving forward. And then just a public announcement for everyone, because everyone's talking about connectivity. I just found out from Salem, we've been pushing to get some dollars for our pedestrian bridge at Sunset, and just came out of the budget committee. It looks like we're going to get $4 million from Salem. They're voting on it on Saturday. So that's really good news toward getting that bridge in place. Just thought everybody'd be interested in that.
Fantastic. Okay. All right. I'm going to move us ahead to the next agenda item. This is a follow-up on our information last meeting that had to do with economic trends. And now we're going to move on to economic opportunities. And so I'll turn it over to Sam, and he'll give us a presentation.
Thanks, Joe. As Joe said, we're really building on the development trends and implications memo we put together last time, which was really a existing conditions assessment, looking at some of the broader trends for the region for various land uses, primarily employment-based, so industrial, office, retail, and healthcare, hospitality, and some others. So this, in conducting and putting together this new memo, which is the Economic Opportunities and Challenges memo, we started off with stakeholder interviews with a number of different folks, just to get their perspectives on what they thought the opportunities and constraints were for Sherwood West. So some of those stakeholders included developers of employment space and commercial space, so Harsh, Pack Trust, and Trammell Crow. We interviewed McAdam Forbes, who is a large broker in the region with expertise in the similar land uses. We also interviewed public agency partners, so Business Oregon, Washington County Economic Development, Metro, and GPI, great important names that could kind of shed some light on what Sherwood's competitive advantages might be. We interviewed Providence, who's also obviously like a big healthcare provider in the region, just to get their sense on whether there would be opportunities for sort of healthcare facilities moving forward in Sherwood. And then we also looked at the tourism and the hospitality side of things. So interviews with a couple of wine industry folks, as well as hotel developers and experts. And then in that, we kind of plugged all the gaps. That's really been the basis of our findings here that I'll present over the next few slides, and then with a little bit of additional analysis as well. So if we go to the next slide, I can talk through about what some of those findings were. So a lot of this is consistent with kind of some of the things that was just discussed, primarily on the business and employment side. What we found, what we heard, was there is a strong regional demand for industrial sites of all types, primarily mixed employment. So when we talk about mixed employment, we're thinking about industrial, thinking about flex space and office space. And the land needs range anywhere from 20 acres to something in excess of 100, which then gets into that more of the campus style, large campuses that you see often in Hillsborough or further east as well. And some of the tenants that you might expect in these areas are pretty much anybody that would need that kind of space. But the city has a number of target industries ranging from tech to bioscience and others that would be good prospective tenants, and stakeholders that we interviewed were consistent with that. There's obviously some constraints that it's important to recognize. Property ownership in the area is varied. There's a lot of different property owners, and that has an impact on how and when the area develops out. There's also a lot of pretty challenging topographical conditions. So by that, I mean there's a lot of steep slopes and things like creeks that someone else mentioned that makes a lot of development, particularly industrial development, quite challenging to do. And then there's just a lack of general activity that is required. Activity meaning jobs and rooftops and housing units that are generally required to attract different employers to businesses to certain areas. So just real fast, I mean, the office market, it's a challenging environment to be in the office market right now, largely due to the pandemic, and the suburban office market hasn't necessarily performed as well over the past several years as more urban areas. But at the same time, there's a lot of shifting preferences. As someone mentioned, a lot of people want more space, and the suburban environment is becoming a lot more attractive to a lot of people for a number of reasons. So that's an opportunity in select locations for Sherwood West. And then it's not just the industrial side of things and that will be in demand going forwards. The residential growth that's expected further north and in and around Sherwood itself are going to drive demand for certain retail types. And so grocery, restaurants, specialty stores, things like neighborhood nodes and convenience type of retail will be suitable for Sherwood West. It's important to note that here that realistically what we think is as retail and nodes, we will be some of the stakeholder feedback we got was that make sure you differentiate from Old Town, but have a connection to Old Town. Find the niche there, and obviously certain things will work and certain things won't. So tying into Old Town is a critical thing there. And then lastly, just moving forward, and a key strategy is just to be transparent and have a plan for land and the timing of bringing in land to the city, what the regulatory structure looks like, what the zoning looks like, and then the infrastructure planning as well. And one last thing I wanted, I should just come back to is mention that it's important to I want to reiterate that the industrial demand piece is really really the crux of it. There is a strong demand for industrial region-wide. And regardless of Sherwood's kind of proximity or lack of, or distance from the I-5 corridor, some of those things are not necessarily as important as just the availability of land in general, and the infrastructure provisions that come along with that. So if we go to the next slide, what that might look like in terms of development types, I come back to the multi-tenant flex and mixed employment space, and that's a little bit jargony, but in essence, what that means is you're looking at buildings that house a lot of different types of tenants, and it's slightly lower intensity than maybe a large manufacturer or a big distribution or warehouse. But that's really where the demand and the suitability is in this kind of area. There may be opportunities for campus developments, but the market's pretty unproven in this area. And that might include some build-to-suit single-use buildings. It might also include the multi-tenant flex. But the campus developments would be largely limited to the northern Sherwood. Again, the convenience / community serving retail center is probably where you're going to see most of the demand for new retail, as well as in mixed-use buildings. And it's important to note that, yeah, that might be, we got a lot of space. We've got some space to work with here. So the horizontal mixed-use building, rather than meaning there would be a mix of different uses from retail to residential to office, generally lower to moderate density rather than the kind of the high-rise development that you might see closer into Portland. And also coming back to the hotel piece, the hospitality piece, we heard that there is a missing, there's a need for hotel to tie into the wine industry. There's a need for hotels just to support economic growth and the growth of employment generally. But it's probably not going to come for a little bit. And it's important to recognize that Old Town is maybe better suited, as well as other places further south into wine country that might be better suited to wine-specific opportunities. So just being realistic about some of the opportunities here is important, and recognizing that there is a competitive market, and Sherwood itself has a number of other areas in the city that might be best suited for certain night uses, and that a sort of boutique hotel might be one of those. So next slide. Quickly noting a few locational considerations. There's the map on the right shows some of the steeps, the areas with steep slope. And so the orange and red is showing slopes that are more than 10%. And so we typically think of suitable land for industrial or mixed employment land as anywhere with a slope less than 5% that has infrastructure provided and large contiguous ownerships. So when you look at this map, you realize that actually we're only looking at a few sites or a few appropriate areas that are actually suitable in size and topographical conditions for that industrial development. And that piece between Haid Road and Kruger Road is accounted for as well, because that's the high school. But surrounding the high school, you may have some opportunities. You may have some opportunities for lower intensity office and retail users that may support and be complementary to the high school and the residential uses that may surround that. And then lastly, Highway 99, with its approximate 0.8 miles of frontage, some of that is accounted for with the creek there also. That's really the only highway frontage that we're talking about, and highway frontage is important for a lot of transportation dependent employers, and as well as convenience-based retailers that want access and visibility. But seeing as access is likely only going to be from either Kruger Road or Chapman Road rather than from the highway itself, again, that's pretty limited in terms of opportunities for new development. So either retail or transportation dependent industrial, so a bit of distribution may only be near those two nodes. Finally, next slide, please. So there's a few high level strategies and recommendations that we made for growing employment and getting the city to that more balanced jobs to housing mix, and that is just to be flexible in the zoning, in its phasing and infrastructure. And the zoning piece is I want to make sure that we're not necessarily suggesting that the city is just going to allow anything and everything. It's really about maintaining enough flexibility in the code that the city can respond to opportunities as necessary, and the land stipulations are not precluding developments that are wanted, but simply the limitations on the zoning are for undesirable uses. Then beyond that, really just planning for that mixed employment and multi-tenant space, while being proactive and patient, waiting for the right opportunities, but also having a plan and a bit of certainty in place that allows for developers to really know what they're getting into. And that comes into the infrastructure as well. Focusing on the infrastructure implementation, it's a big area with no infrastructure, well, very little infrastructure at the moment. A lot of those users may need pretty significant infrastructure needs, and so having a good concrete plan to get that in place is important. And then let's not lose sight of businesses want a place that has access to talent, educated, skilled people, as well as quality of place. And that's not only on the business side, that's the employer side. Sherwood will benefit if it does invest in its talent and creates a place where people can live, work, and play with a number of different housing options. Then, in terms of land acquisitions, one of the things we heard from stakeholders was that the challenges of assembling some of the land, or the assembling land, will probably be necessary, or almost certainly be necessary, to get some of these larger employment centers or tech parks or whatever ends up happening to actually happen. And so some sort of land assembly plan may be necessary to push that agenda along. And on a similar note, a toolkit of incentives and tools. These things aren't going to happen overnight. There needs to be some sort of mechanisms or availability of resources for developers and businesses, regardless of the level of demand that we're seeing. And then again, coming back to those two select locations, really it's 99W and then surrounding the high school, and primarily North Sherwood West for those larger employment centers. So that's all I've got. I will pause and take questions. I see a few of them came through the chat. So, Kira?
Yeah, looks like we have one question in the chat from Jean, and she says, do you have a code example that works?
Without being experts in, we're not, well, Leland doesn't claim to be experts in code, but I will say that I probably have more examples of code that doesn't necessarily work, and time again people point to examples like Wilsonville, the Coffee Creek area, where the city was overly specific in the types of tenants and businesses that they wanted, and also divide up the land in a way that wasn't necessarily flexible or accommodating for a phased development approach. But certainly there's a number of different places we can look to find example codes, and I think that's one of the things that we'll be helping APG out with going forward.
Sam, just to add on to that, I think the types of industries and employment, mixed employment that you found to be strong is pretty close to Sherwood's employment industrial zone without the 50-acre component that was important to Tonkin area. And the kinds of other standards that Sherwood has that talk about quality industrial buildings and visual corridors and so on are also very compatible with what you're suggesting here that you found in the study.
Thanks,
Okay.
Joe. Yeah, and that was backed up in our interviews. We did hear from 2 developers that already have plans in the Tonkin employment area, plus another one that was considering it. That Sherwood's Tonkin zoning was a good model to utilize, with tweaks, obviously, in the Sherwood West area. So I'll back that up.
I'm not seeing any hands raised, so let's just go the old-fashioned method here of.
There's one more question in the chat from Bruce, if you want to take that real quick, Joe.
Let's take Kennedy's question or comment, and then we'll go to the chat.
Okay.
Yeah. Hey, Sam, thanks for the presentation. Great ideas. So I guess, yeah, so my fundamental question is, so these are great strategies, looks like a lot of growth. How do you keep Sherwood from becoming that urban sprawl place that, you know, people don't want to have here, and why they move here is because Sherwood isn't that. So with the growth, I mean, how do you keep the sprawl out of here, essentially?
Great question, and I think it's being deliberate enough and having a robust vision, robust and clear vision, and backing that up on the regulatory side. I think that's pretty much the crux of it. I think that's largely what we will be assisting APG in doing, and coming up with this concept plan that will then eventually be turned into zoning code and implemented by the city. So that's essentially it. I mean, making sure that there's a robust concrete plan in place, and it's backed up in zoning and the city's implementation of the plan. And I'm sorry, that's a overly simple answer, but I think that's
yeah. Sam, this is Chris at Leland. I might add on to what Sam's saying in the design matters, and so the urban design elements, the managing the traffic, the pedestrian oriented nature, the trails and the landscape, that all is really essential to keeping it unique to Sherwood. And I think it's finding that balance of, you know, capturing the market opportunities, but still having a design which I think sometimes is, you don't usually hear an economist saying design matters, but it really does. And that's also part of what will make it attractive to the kinds of businesses that you want to attract, because it's different than your typical suburban sprawl. It's something special that, you know, is in fitting with the quality of life attributes that make Sherwood a desirable place for businesses currently.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Can I just add to that real quick? This is Tim. I agree with everything that you guys just said about design matters, and where and how we zone and where we zone is critical for that. I will say we have, as a city, we have a lot of advantages when it comes to controlling sprawl. We have, you know, just outside Sherwood West is a 100-year rural reserve. So it'll be a long time before that's ever touched. We have the wildlife refuge on one side. We have undesignated areas on Clackamas County, and not to mention Chehalem Mountain and Parrot Mountain. So the geography helps us out quite a bit in terms of controlling the sprawl as well.
Okay, let's go into the chat here, and Kira, why don't you read what you're seeing?
Sure. The first chat question is from Bruce, He says, do you see opportunities for tech incubation that could look at SH Sherwood High School as an education core since they have a strong STEM and career tech ed focus?
That's for you, Sam and Chris.
Yeah, and I think we covered this a little bit in the last meeting, but yeah, I mean, there's absolutely opportunities there for tech incubation as we see more businesses coming into the area from further north and south and further afield. Whether or not that translates to kind of land use or real estate development kind of remains to be seen, but I think there are a number of interventions that we can be done on the city side and its partners as well, for that matter, to encourage kind of that tech incubation as part of new development. And so I think it's going to be probably smaller scale, but it could certainly create a sort of a small nodal opportunity or critical mass of kind of new talent creation in a way, so to speak.
Yeah, and I would add, I think that's one of those, it's kind of like the design conversation we just had, where there's the market and you can capture the market as it grows, but through strong design controls or good design controls, as well as a program in partnership with the high school for STEM and career education. That's a way to be sort of more proactive and direct that growth into specific industries or potentially locations that you want it. So yeah, it's certainly possible. And I could see that being something that we recommend that the city and the school district look at as part of the implementation strategy.
Tim, did you have another comment? I see a hand raised.
I think he might have stepped away for a minute.
Oh, okay. Well, good.
Rodney had another question in the chat, which is, how did Woodhaven happen? Was that through zoning or a developer?
I can add to that a little bit. I worked for the planning and engineering firm that was working for the developer. I think between the two, it was a little bit of each, if memory serves. It's a long time ago now. But Woodhaven was a master developer, master planned approach. So the types of beautiful parkways that you see and sunsets design and all those paths that connect through the neighborhoods and so on were all thought out in total for the entire area. And I can't remember the exact collaboration, but the city was definitely kind of solution oriented and working with the development side of it. Maybe others have more specific knowledge, but that's what I recall. Okay. Other comments, questions, ideas about economic opportunities? I want to let's go to you, Norman. Go ahead. Did you have a comment?
No, I had no comment. I just cleared my throat.
Okay. Let's just summarize a little bit, kind of with the map in mind. And if you could back up a couple slides to the map. So we've been referring to the north portion of Sherwood West. And Kira, I'd like you just, so we all get on the same page, let's just put the cursor up there. Hopefully it'll show. There we go. So, and go to the right a little bit. So on the right-hand side, that's Roy Rogers Road right there. And the large flat field is what we've been referring to as that key industrial opportunity. Large ownerships, fairly flat. You can see over a little bit over there, yeah, a little bit to the left of the blue, it starts to go up. So when we spoke with the technical advisory committee, we noted that we should do some more detailed mapping and map where the slopes are less than 5% and try and match that up to the ownerships and so on. So that's one area. And then Sam referred to close to the high school. There is some compatibility and some opportunity for perhaps some office and commercial. And my own sense of that is that that's probably primarily south of Kruger. It's those parcels that are south of the high school and have some visibility from the highway. And then the third area was along 99. And Sam, I think you were referring specifically to kind of the southern bubble, what the preliminary plan labeled as a gateway district. So there may be some additional small neighborhood nodes, but these points, these locational considerations listed here, what we just colored in blue is fundamentally the general areas for those. Okay, last questions, ideas, things you're interested in. Jean, you have a thought?
Yeah, so just for clarity and in looking at how this would be zoned, are you envisioning like the employment industrial area that we have in Tonquin, similar zoning type in the far north, and then more of an office at the far south, office type zoning, small commercial, and then a small medium commercial in the middle? Is that?
I think those ideas are kind of compatible with what we've heard from Sam and Chris. You know, we got a ways to go, so
right,
we got to look at some options and think about it. But what you just summarized sort of resonates with the market findings they have. Do you have specific ideas or things that the Planning Commission may have talked about over the years?
Not specifically. I was in one of the previous comments, we're talking about how do we ensure something happens. We're currently going through our comprehensive plan update as a city. That project has been a culmination of 2 years worth of work with another citizen advisory committee. And those are some of the actions and goals that we're looking at is what is important to the residents of Sherwood and how do we maintain the quality of life given some of the mandates that are coming down from the state when it comes to housing requirements and expectations for density within that area. So.
Okay. All right. Any last thoughts on this general topic of economic opportunities? Okay. All right. Thank you, Sam and Chris. Super helpful information, and we'll move ahead. That's it for that agenda item. Erica, let me check in. Did we have any public comment that came in?
We did not have any formal public comments that came in.
Okay. So I think we're up to next steps. It's a beautiful evening out there. I think it's okay to conclude a little bit early. I mentioned the meeting flow. So we have one more meeting as a group where we'll start to get into a few of the plan ideas. Really, we've just started to talk about them now. So that's a nice bridge to what we'll talk about next time, which will cover some transportation and some additional land use ideas and natural resource. And then after that, as Kira mentioned, is an open house. So our next meeting date is listed here, August 4th. And we'll be doing a variety of the public outreach and information items that we mentioned. Jean, did you have another thought?
Yeah, I don't know how to raise my hand in Zoom, so.
Oh, that's okay.
That's the best I got, I think.
Yeah.
One other item that I wanted to mention in the project overview, the document talks about one of the reasons for relooking it was relooking at this area.
Mhm.
The high school was put in there and the other things that had happened internally in the area. But I think one of the items that resonates in me is that there's been so much housing built to the north that that external pressure is impacting what we could and should do in the Sherwood West area.
When you say north, you're referring to River Terrace, South
Yes.
Cooper Mountain, and
Yes.
maybe King City soon. Okay.
Yeah, I think including that in the project overview will help guide people reading the document to understand that external forces also provided reason for a revisit on this, besides the council wanting to balance the tax base.
And you're talking about the project overview in the PI plan?
Yeah, both in the project overview and in the, yeah, I think there was something in the key message area when we put this out and when we explain the why we are doing this, it might be nice to include that thousands of houses have been built to the north, and this is an economic opportunity that the Sherwood residents and Sherwood West should be considering.
We had a chat from Rodney about transportation will shape Sherwood West and need a similar meeting to what we just had. So we'll make sure we have some focused time on transportation in our next meeting. It'll be one of several topics, but thank you for the comment there. And then from Emily, just curious if the funds approval for the Sunset Bridge that Tim referenced is public information. Tim, can you help us out on that?
Yeah, that's all public. You can go to the OLA system down in Salem and read the copy of the bill. So yeah, that's public.
Great. Okay, Erica, that's all I have. Any last words from you?
I don't have any last words except for the fact that we have a tentative meeting date on hold for August 4th. And I sent out that email last week. So if you could put that date on your calendar, that's what we're aiming for.
Okay. All right, then with that, thanks everybody. We are adjourned.